But I haven't given a speech since election night, so I'm a little rusty, so I hope you'll bear with me. I won't be long either, I promise. But first of all, my first observation is this. There's a lot of Cubans in this room. Two quick observations coming off a long campaign trail. There is a tremendous amount of curiosity all across the state. Surprising to me as I traveled over the last 2 years. A tremendous amount of curiosity about the Cuban exile community and a tremendous amount of curiosity about U.S. policy towards Cuba. These are the two things that I learned. There's a tremendous amount of curiosity about the Cuban exile community. Because how could this community, after 52 years, it's going to be 52 years here in about 10 days, still be so committed to this cause? I mean, if you do the math, most of the people who are now fighting on behalf of this issue, on behalf of the United States having its right policy towards Cuba, were children. Some weren't even born when this came about in 1959. Why are you still so committed to this cause is the question that people often ask. Didn't you come to this country and become successful in business, in politics, in the arts? Aren't you fully ingrained in America? How come you haven't moved on? That's a relic of the Cold War, which some people will ask. I think people don't say that in an ill-intentioned way, but there's a legitimate curiosity about this community. What I try to explain is that for this community, this was not just about a change in government. This was literally about the loss of your country, your culture, your families, everything you understood to be. There were people, I think it's hard for some of us, who are my age or younger to remember that their parents and grandparents once had dreams. That people used to be young before they were your parents and grandparents. They had the same things that young people have now. They had dreams, they had aspirations, they had hopes. They had things they wanted to be. Do you know the story, how many millions of people that became impossible for? Not because they did something wrong, but because literally, at the blink of an eye, in one tragic turn of history, all of that was wiped away. And people who were on their way to becoming doctors found themselves washing dishes at the Fontainebleau Hotel. People who were working, maybe were engineers or lawyers, found themselves cleaning yards in Miami. Now that's honorable work, and they are grateful, with tremendous gratitude for being able to come to this country and give their children and grandchildren opportunities they didn't have. But that is a truly impactful and traumatic event. That was not the result of a change in political system or government. It was literally the result of losing your country in a way that few nations on earth have ever lost. And that carries on. That's a true legacy that many of us have inherited from our parents and grandparents. You try to explain that to people, and I think they understand a little bit better. Not just why this community has been so successful, but why it loves this country so much, and why it is so committed to ensuring that Cuba will one day once again be free. The second thing that people are curious about is U.S. policy towards Cuba. Why are we still, the question I most often get is, when is American policy towards Cuba going to change? And my answer is, well, when is Cuban policy going to change? How come that question's never asked? How come nobody ever asks, when is Cuba going to change? When are people in Cuba going to one day decide, you know what, I'm going to open up a newspaper and say whatever I'm going to say? When is that going to happen? When will people stop going to jail for handing out pamphlets or speaking their mind? When is that going to happen? When can you run for office, like legitimately run for office in a real election? When is that going to happen? Of course, when you say this to people, it gets them thinking. Then they say, yeah, but the rest of the world is doing it. Italy, France, Spain, Canada. And I have to remind them something you and I know very well. The United States is not the rest of the world. We are the single greatest society in all the history of mankind. Every other society claims to believe some of the things we believe. But none has ever fought for them the way we have. There is no nation on earth like this. There's never been a country like the United States. And if there is not a country on earth willing to fight, willing to stand for these principles that we have written into our own Declaration of Independence and in our Constitution, then what country in the world is going to? We are still the last hope of much of the world. I had a question once from a French journalist who asked me, what do you say to the people in France? They get offended when you say America is the best country in the world. I said, they shouldn't. The most successful French people in the world live in America. America is not a race, it's not an ethnicity, it's not a language, it's not a religion. It is ideals and principles, a very simple one. You and I were born with certain rights that come from God, and there isn't a country, a government, a leader, a law, a court, not a single authority on the earth that can deny you those God-given rights. That is what our nation is founded on. And Cuba tests us every day on whether we really believe that or not. Look, I get it, we've messed up. There are other countries in the world that violate human rights, and we have accords with them and trade with them and all sorts of things. But none of them are 90 miles away from our country. And none of them are reversible. We are on the right side on Cuba policy. Maybe we got it wrong in other countries, but we have gotten it right in Cuba. And the way to deal with Cuba is not to treat it like these other countries, but in fact to stand for the principles we believe in as a nation and as a people, and to prove to the world that there is at least one country on earth that will continue to stand for these principles, and one country on earth whose leaders will point out every time leaders in other countries violate them. And let me tell you, there's only been, I don't know of any precedent in American politics where a community has been able to organize and influence the foreign policy of a nation the way the Cuban exile community has done, the way organizations like this have done, particularly the way this organization has done the last 4 to 6 years.